to the IWAR Network Tubecast. I'm your host, Alex G., your NWL Commissioner. Along with me, as always, we have IWAR Commissioner Matt Riley. How you doing tonight, Matt?
I'm dandy.
Yes, indeed. So tonight's topic will be the IWAR, how it got started, and why exactly we have it. So, Matt, if you want to go into some of the histrionics of the IWAR?
Sure. All right. I came back out of IWAR after a 10-year hiatus in 2005, roughly, and did really enjoy it. The game was really about big roster players. The kind of fun, creative aspect had gone away. So 2006, I was like, screw this, took off. And 2009, Frank Snow was like, hey, you should come back. So when I came back in 2010, I said, okay, but we're going to make a haven for players who like creative style of play. Like just kind of an oasis within the game. Because in the game out of the way, they have about, I think it's like 70 leagues right now. So each league's its own little world. So the idea was to kind of make a network of leagues that work together. So we kind of kicked this around, and the idea at first was, okay, it'll be some of the core leagues in the Gold Federation, which is smack dab in the middle of the cycle. And we had the BRL, the ASL, the BBL, and the NWL originally. And it was just 4 leagues. And the idea was that we'd have this kind of network, so we'd have pay-per-views, anyone could be involved. And early on, we were kind of just not going too big with things, just kind of feeling things out. And it was called the Gold Rush Report. And the Gold Rush Report was like a Commissioner's Report magazine that encapsulated all these leagues. So each league had its own little page, but at its core, it was basically the BRL report. I just, put it on steroids with other league reports.
Right.
Over time, we kind of grew the game that way. And the idea was to set up this oasis of leagues that really tailored themselves and catered to the creative style of play with more trash talk and angles and feuds and character development over just, trying to score big titles in the IWAR report. And it worked pretty well. We saw some really talented players come along, and eventually over time, it got bigger and bigger. And the Gold Rush Report originally, we had John Stevenson did some of the covers, I did some of the covers, and Bob Rogers came along, started doing some of the covers. And eventually, the Gold Rush evolved.
So, Matt, let me ask you a question. How did the Gold Rush Report kind of transition into the IWAR?
All right, so how do we transition from the Gold Rush Report to the IWAR? Well, the Gold Rush Report was chugging along, and we were doing pretty well. At one point, Frank Snow had expressed his interest in retiring probably into the year. Now, as anybody who plays anybody knows, it's one of those things like, this is it. This is my last year. I'm done. So he seemed pretty serious, so I took his word at it, and I actually went out and started looking for some possible options to be co-commissioner because it helps a lot to have someone to work with. One of the people that came about was a player who came back named Bob Rogers. And Bob, actually, I played with him way back in 87 and 88 when we were both in the Grandmasters League, and the GML was a hotbed of activity, and he had Johnny Revolution and the Death Pack. So he brought them back, and one of the things he was like, this villainous guy out to get superstar Rick Riley, and it was, mayhem and so forth. So when we started putting it together and said, okay, well, if we're going to do something, let's do something really big and make it really, really good. Kind of along the way, I would check every so often and see where Frank was, and he was still retiring and planning to do it. I was like, okay. Didn't really give much thought, just kind of, so we started prepping things, thinking, okay, well, if we're going to have some change, let's make something really drastic. So what we did is we had this whole angle where his character, Johnny Revolution, purchased the IWA, was the new de facto boss of the game, and he was, of course, the, villainous heel boss who was out to make the game in his image, so to speak.
Right.
And one of the things he did was, the idea was that he'd have good ideas to go along. So he'd be like, oh, well, this guy's terrible, but he has some good ideas. The Gold Rush Report became the IWA Revolution. And, of course, Johnny Revolution, play on the name. And he spread his influence throughout the different leagues we were in. Over time, there were angles and everything unfolding. So it kind of got bigger and it started to expand his reach, if you will. But he also got involved with the rookies. So it was a lot of ways of getting the players more involved. So the game was evolving from just sort of a loose network of leagues to an actual coherent storyline that tied them all together.
Right.
Eventually, that storyline was playing out, And it was kind of a combination of things. One of the things we did along the way was anytime you have success, you sometimes inherit enemies, and there were people that were jealous of what we were putting together and that we were pulling it off. And they tried desperately to run interference with the fun of the game, which just made them look like idiots. When that failed, they eventually left, but along the way, one of the casualties was Bob was just unhappy with the way things worked out, so he decided to just leave the game. And I can go into that whole story in another episode.
Right.
After dark. As Bob and I talk about our special podcast, we could do a Tubecast at some point about that thing.
Yeah.
But what happened was the storyline of Johnny Revolution as the boss had kind of run its course. We needed to have a new direction, and I was actually in Indianapolis at Gen Con when the idea for the name change hit me, and that's where IWA Ringside came into play.
Right. Yeah, it's funny about you mentioned Bob. He was like kind of my first mentor, I guess you would call him. He did a lot of great things for the game, and his contribution is still felt throughout the IWAR leagues.
Oh, definitely. And the thing is that Bob and I were very big on let's really groom this next generation of players and help them go with the game. And I think Bob was very or is very opinionated, and he's not afraid to tell you how he thinks or feels about things. And if you don't like it, that's fine. But it was kind of a part of the John Ocean persona that some players didn't like, and that's fine. I mean, I always tell people all the time that the IWAR may not be for everyone, and that's completely fine. That's okay. But if it doesn't suit you, that's fine. But if it does suit you, just enjoy it. And the way we worked the angle out is Johnny Revolution ended up losing his control of the Empire and kind of, well, maybe you can talk to it better than I can because it was at your hands.
Yeah, because I was I had requested to be the one to take the pinball on that one.
Yeah.
Because I had ideas of my own that I wanted to do in the future. And, having Luther go crazy because he's the one that lost and he's the reason that Johnny Revolution wasn't going to be around anymore. I really wanted to do this angle where he went looking for him and he started going nuts. And that's kind of how we transitioned into having Luther as our commissioner of the NWL. Is
Yes.
Like in the contract of anything was ever to happen to Johnny Revolution, Luther would take the commissionership of the NWL, and pretty much it was kind of Johnny's way of saying, haha, you may have gotten rid of me, but look, you have one of my disciples who's running the show here in the NWL for the rookies,
Right.
and causing havoc and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, I actually requested him, like, can I please be the one to take the fall on?
And for me, it was a good transition because what ended up happening is Bob left the game. Like I said, he left a lot of infrastructure in place.
Yeah.
You stepped in, and Luther Alexander stepped in as that commissioner role. So we had the IWA Revolution become the IWA Ringside, but the IWAR was still, if you will, name-wise.
Yeah.
And the IWAR expanded from 4 leagues to 8. Players wanted to get involved, so we had the MML. It was Matt Mayhem, and then it was Mexican Mayhem,
Yeah.
and they expanded. They joined it, so it was MML. Then the Texas Death League also joined when Kevin Perry took over. I'm sorry, Will Wisdom took over the TDL, and we had, of course, ASL, BBL, and IWL. So we had all these leagues and a lot of action, and it was expanding faster than we figured.
Yeah.
We'd always had this kind of idea in the back of our heads, like we'll add like 1 league a year and slowly expand. But in IWA terms, the way the gameplay is every 3 weeks, it's not like you have years to wait. It's kind of a more advanced timeline. You kind of push things along. It grew and expanded, and all of a sudden we had 8 leagues, and so the IWAR was getting more robust. There was a lot more involvement. So what we did is we created the IWAR World Champion. And the IWAR World Championship was sort of like a throwback to the Ric Flair days of the 80s, where Ric Flair would tour the various promotions throughout the country and world and defend the World Championship. So we had the same idea, and the idea was that we determine a champion. And originally the idea was we were going to do it all based on trash talk. And while that was a novel concept in some ways, it wasn't very effective because we were hoping to get people to really trash talk about being the champion. Like Koenig was our longest running champion when it first started because he just was really great with the trash talk, and The idea was to use the title to kind of move storylines along. We had some good plots that revolved around it. The more we had it that way, the more we kind of said, we could make this better. And what we did is when the title was on, actually one of Bob's guys, Colonel Max Strife, who was this big baby face, kind of like a Sergeant Slaughter type, but more athletic. We had him start defending the title within the game itself, so it was using the holds. So what we adopted was a system from the Mid-Atlantic Regional League, which had this fantastic formula where the champion got a 3-point advantage. So if you beat the champion by, 2 points, you didn't win the title. You had to really clearly beat the champion. Now, if you beat him by 3 points, that was the advantage. You got to push, so you got to rematch the next cycle, but without the advantage. So it's sort of like a way of saying, okay, let's see you do it again. And it helped to build some continuity with the title because that way it wasn't jumping from person to person to person all the time. And you could really see how tough it could be to, take the belt off somebody. A good example of that is in the BRL. Sir Gunter Kinderwart has been the champion forever, it feels like. And before him, it was Robert Van Damage. So it's a good system, and it's fair. That kind of came out of it. And the idea was that this champion was touring each of the leagues. So after 8 different champions, so you had to be a commissioner champion in your home league, if you will, to get that shot.
Right.
And it was a good way to expand that. And what ended up happening was we had a lot of involvement from various players, but it got to be a little unruly because when you had that many commissioners chiming in on things and trying to keep things all going, it did make it a little more difficult. As anyone who works in this game or plays in this game can tell you, being a commissioner, especially co-commissioner, can be, a struggle at times because you got to bounce ideas off each other. You have to come to an agreement on certain things. Just the IWAR got to be too big to really have what we wanted, which we got away from like the idea of just having 3 to 5 really strong leagues, not just having it be like join the IWAR to be part of the IWAR, like really have it be focused.
Yeah.
The IWAR Ringside magazine got to be better and better, and we really kind of refined things and we changed it over time. So what the IWAR really is now is a combination of that network league. So we have events that kind of connect the leagues. You have events right now like Murano Memorial Tag Team Tournament, which involves teams from every league. We have the Four Corners Invitational, same idea, competitors from every league. And it's a way to get people to play against each other, and we have storylines going on. It helps bring about that creative aspect of play.
I just remember when we had the 8 leagues, the amount of interleague matches was insane for a small period of time, and IWA probably hated that because we ran so many of them.
Yeah, the first Johnny B Cup was almost 128 wrestlers, and I always laugh because one of my wrestlers, Senya Lucha, won it, and people were like, "Oh, it's favoritism." And I always laugh because he fought an extra match in one of the rounds because there was a guy who missed the deadline, but he mailed the Attaway, physically mailed them. So I felt bad. And also he was a rival of Senya Lucha named Arsenal, who was one of the highest win total guys. If you go at the Attaway report, it's every other cycle, it's most stars, most money, most wins. He's always in the top 2 or 3 spots. His name's Arsenal. So Arsenal and Lucha had this history. So I thought, okay, I'll have him face Arsenal and his opponent for that round, and if he can't win either one, the other guy advances. And he beat both guys. So there were a ton of interleague matches, and it was kind of like a headache and a half because sometimes they didn't get played, so you had to play this game of what was their strategy, and it took a lot of math and digging on my part. So now we've kind of gone away from that and gone back to the, let's have every league have its own tournament to determine their representative. And I think it's a little more fun that way too, because you can say, who was the AFC conference? Who was the NFC conference?
Yeah.
Thing. But really, the 8 leagues was really unruly because you also had, certain things going on where you had one league that was really, really active and some leagues were getting less active. And it was hard to kind of you want to present the best possible product. And I think what we did by cutting back was get back to what we wanted to do in the first place, which is just really have 4 top-notch leagues and go from there, It's been great ever since. It's really been the best thing we did,
I mean, it must be much easier in terms of quality control now.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I think it's much easier to, run the events, follow events, and as far as keeping things on the up and up, if you will.
Yeah.
And running events are easier to do. We do still have interleague matches, of course, because the IWAR champion defends against the various commissioner champions. So again, if you want to be the IWAR world champion, It's just our way of having a title that, again, we just created, and it's our representative for the IWAR Alliance. It doesn't get you anything per se besides some prestige that your wrestler held it.
Bragging rights.
Bragging rights, and right now the champion is Sir Gunter Kinderwacht, who's just, Mark Duchesne's wrestler, who Mark Duchesne's one of the best players in the game, so he's very tough to beat. So
Extremely tough to beat.
yeah,
I'm
so
having issues myself trying to get just a win over him. So
yeah, but it's good for the game too to have a champion who is really tough because that makes the title mean more, So whoever does finally manage to beat him for the title is going to have quite the bragging rights. And again, it's just the momentum of that title. I always feel like, a lot of times in the games, the titles that mean the most are the ones that players covet the most. It's on us to help build that up. So we have that now. We have the IWAR World Championship. We also have the IWAR World Tag Team Championship, which we used this past year's Tag Team Derby winners to establish the champions. And they were the Von Schnapps. The Von Schnapps, which my crazy throwaway tag team to make the sons of Victor Von Schnapp, this tag team duo, these goofy high flyers, and they just kept winning. 4-time tag champions, and now they're also IWAR World Tag Team Champions. So, having a team like that have the belts adds some prestige. It makes it more coveted. So if somebody beats them, it's a really big thing. And like I mentioned on our pre-show, that this particular cycle coming up, the Von Schnapp brothers, Alex and Axel, take on Black Wrestlers Matter, which is Rich Schwarzenberg's team, Black Predator and Silverback Jack. The Von Schnapps, since he arrived with his team, haven't beat his team yet. So it's like, okay, that's one. They're defending the world tag titles. It's a Murano match, and it's in a steel cage. So there's all these layers to it, and they hate each other. So it's a good high level matchup, and
lots of things on the line on that one.
Right, and again, we both trash talk. We both submit stuff with our stuff, and he's done a really good job of establishing a lot of characters, and he does a really good job of writing to different voices. That's always, for me, really, it's a big win, because now it's like, whoever that match goes, I can write a little blurb about that in the IWAR news page, and I know I have something to work with, And as far as players go, we talked about the Tubecast previous about trash talk. Players sometimes express their frustration at not getting a feedback from other players. Like I said this attack in, the guy didn't respond at all, or I called this guy out, no one even said anything. And that happens, but it happens less in the IWAR leagues because you have more players who are looking to trash talk, so you're in the same boat together. One of the things you have to realize is that if you go to certain leagues that are not trash talk friendly or are not creatively focused, you're not going to have as much fun playing. You could still have fun. I don't want to say it's a shock, but going from an IWAR league to a non-IWAR league, there's definitely a very quick difference. You can notice right away.
And I think that leads into my next question about what's the difference between the IWAR and then the IWA at large.
Okay, well, the first thing you say is what's so different about them. They play the same game engine, the same set of holds as like everyone else in Gold. One of the first things is there are roster limits. Every league has a 6-wrestler limit. There are people, I mentioned earlier about the non-fans of the IWAR, were really against having roster limits. And their crux of their argument was, well, you're limiting someone's fun. I understand that. If you want to have 10 wrestlers, it's more of a case, in my opinion, that you need 10 wrestlers to win as opposed to enjoy the game. Because very rarely do you see someone write up 10 wrestlers worth of trash talk. I think I may have seen it once or twice the whole time I've played. When I talk about substantially honest. Now, gameplay-wise, the roster limits help keep the league on a level playing field. We all can have up to 6 wrestlers. We're all kind of in the same boat, except for Mark Duchesne, who just keeps winning. But there's certain players who just, no matter what you do to them, like Andy Koenig, good Lord, how many Metro titles has he won? Like 18? He keeps winning them, and he's awesome at it. Join blood, Andy. Join blood. Sorry, it's my little stable plug.
The Great David is still currently the NWL national champion.
Well, that's a good point. The Great David won the national title, which is the NWL's commissioner's title. He left the league. He graduated, and he won it like a return match, right? Wasn't that how it happened?
So I was doing this gimmick where I was giving NWL graduates a shot at the national championship. Just a way to get some of these guys back into the fold. These guys, great players and good trash talkers, and basically see how we stacked up against some of the better players and the veterans. We did extremely well at first until we got to the Great David. The Great David won the championship and refused to let it go. So,
Yeah.
I think he's going to lose it sooner than later at this point. But he is the longest reigning NWL national champion to date.
Yeah. so so again, Great David lose the title already, dude. But what happens is you have a collection of players who have grown up, if you will, in the NWL, which is all about trash talk and angles and feuds. One of the things that happens a lot, and we've seen it happen many times, is a player will say, "Well, I'm going to go to this league that advertised on IWA's front page," and they'll check out this new league, and they go there without actually scouting it. And I always encourage players, no matter where you want to transfer to, spend $1 or $2. It's only $1 to check out any league, to get a copy of a bulletin. Check out any of those leagues before you go there, so you see what you're looking at. Some leagues, like you have the Extreme Poison League or the Evil Clown League or the New Breed League, they have commissioners that really invest themselves and their time into it, and they put together a report that has a lot to offer. There's different events. I mean, we're proud of the IWAR, but we're not the only leagues to play in. I always try to make sure people understand that just because we have a really good product doesn't mean that we're the only show in town. And I also think it's a big thing to remember that the more players invest in other leagues, the better those leagues get to be, the stronger the game is.
Agreed.
And that's why we really say we tell players sometimes it's good to go to other leagues and learn other federations and learn how the hold drops work. You might have a bad cycle in gold, but a good one in diamond. So whether it's a league with limits or without limits, that's up to you to play in. But one of the first establishing factors that differs us from most other leagues is a roster limit. The other thing is creative style of play. We really focus on that. We talk about that in our titles. In the BRL, the way we set up our commissioner title chase is we have matches every cycle where it's like a 3-cycle series, and you have 3 matches. But the most points you can get towards beating your opponent is just submitting trash talk. If you don't trash talk, and it's funny, one of the guys sent me an email, like, "I want my guy involved," and I'm like, "Well, you don't trash talk ever." And he's like, "Oh yeah, no, don't worry about it." And I'm like, you're wasting your time. You're wasting my time, because if I put somebody against you, they're just going to squash you.
Right.
With 60 points in three rounds. We're probably going to see a title change come up because the tag champions numbers haven't TT'd at all. Agent 26 and Punk Rock Mike, the Suburban Hell Savages, if I'm saying that correctly, trash talk twice. So they've already got a 40-point bonus lead on them, even though they lost one of the matches. Wow. They're going to beat the champions for the titles, even though they didn't, quote unquote, beat them in the matches. Right. And that's why trash talk is more valuable in the IWAR. Another difference between us and other leagues is the level of competition. It's tough. It's very tough to be in the IWAR leagues. Maybe you can speak. You deal with a lot of the NWL rookies, but it's a culture shock of sorts to go from being, hey, a top dog in NWL to in the BRL or IWL or CWL, where there's a lot of seasoned veterans and the competition is very fierce.
I mean, there's definitely an experience gap when you go to some of these vet leagues. So a lot of the issues that I'm running into is when some of these rookies go into the IWL and they don't do bad. By no stretch of the imagination are they doing bad, but they're not winning regional championships like they're used to. So they're used to winning regional championships every cycle. They're used to winning league championships, tag team champions, what have you. And winning a regional championship in the BRL is extremely tough. Winning a regional championship in the CWL is tough. IWL, it's all super tough. So they have to kind of manage their expectations. Like, hey, listen, if I pick up 3 or 4 of these throughout the year, that's a positive, not a negative. And it goes to show you, the amount of really good players that these leagues have, where you're not coming out with a 492 and winning a regional. That's not going to happen.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh, and that's the thing too is we've talked about setting expectations. Is going from the NWL, which is the rookies league, where you're competing with a lot of wrestlers. Number one, so let's keep that in mind. There's we have about, I'd say 40 to 50 players each cycle. Give or take, a dozen maybe, because sometimes we have higher cycles than others. But that's a lot of competition. But the thing is that the experience level is lower, so the people haven't got the holds down. And a good way to gauge that is if you look at the average, like in the top 10 active leagues, the NWL is always the most active, but the average strategy is always like in the 480s or 470s. It's always pretty low because you have players who are still not sure what their holds yet, so they're trying like bite, which is worth 2 points. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
don't do that. We often say in cards, go to other leagues. Like the ASL right now, the All Star League. Frank Snow's the commissioner there, and he's putting together this insanely cool prize package where if you go to the ASL and you submit trash talk, you get 5 free matches just for trash talk.
Boom.
They're going to have a match deal where instead of getting 20 scrub wins, you get 30 for match deals, and the league champions going to get 15 free matches for being the champion. So there's more in the way, but like it's a way like the ASL is not as fierce as the BRL or the IWL or even CWL. The BBL Bloodbath, easy for me to say, league is another league out there. And then there's people will say sometimes like, well, if I go to these random leagues, some leagues, like one guy went to this league and he's like, there was like 5 people who were active, and he met like wrestlers. There was like almost like the league closed a couple cycles later, and he was like, "This is how the game is." I think players need to realize that there are leagues that go from the amazing, like, wow, this is a lot of fun to play in, to the downright stinkers. And the stinkers are often just places people keep active as a way to pad their roster. That's a whole other story, but it's true. I mean, there's no other reason to play there but the fact you're trying to shoot for the report. That's about it.
Or you want to pick up a cheap regional.
Right. I mean, but most players with big rosters could give a crap less about a regional title. It's funny because I remember like when I first started, I have a 2-page type list of all the titles I won, and I like Bodacious Brad Blaze is my first league champion in the Chain Gang League. The Mass Marvel was the first tag champion I had in the Clown and Cat League. And now it's like, oh, like Lucha just won the Eastern title in BRL, but ask me in 3 months, I won't remember which title it was. It's like
it goes to show you the bigger difference. Are you
Right.
going to be remembered for that random regional championship that you won 3 cycles ago, or are you going to be remembered for that kick-ass angle that you had 3 cycles ago?
Right, and that's the thing people have to realize too. Like some players really do an awesome job. I mean, even for small bursts at times. I give this Jeff Annabelle crap sometimes about his trash talk, but it's always good when he submits it. It's always solid. He moves storylines. He lays out plots, and you can work with it. And that's the thing. As a player, you look at other players who have something to offer, and that's the thing you go for. And I always tell people all the time, like, don't wait necessarily, but like, it's good to work with other players. So use Facebook, use our Facebook page. Networking is a great way to build rivalries or have feuds. But a part of the game too is like I had one guy who wanted to feud with me, and he wanted to tell me like every step of the way the feud was going to play out. And I was like, well, part of the fun of the game is playing off the results.
Yeah.
In the CWL, one thing I do a lot with Andy Koenig is I tailor my trash talk off the results. So, for a while, the Von Stomps were in a rut. So I had this grandfather character come in and was always reaming them out about being lazy and too into being, ladies guys because they weren't doing well. And what happens that's really effective is when a player plays off your trash talk, it makes the game more fun. Because you're like, yeah, I got that guy to respond. But I always say, part of the IWAR is choosing to play that way with a creative style also means respecting other players. And what I mean by that is not just a sense of like, calling somebody out by name. I mean the sense of if you're going to write an angle and involve someone else's wrestler, you have to have a respect for that kind of wrestler's style and persona. So, for example, I wouldn't have, Luther Alexander, I wouldn't attack him and have him be like in a beauty salon, like that's not his character. Or like have him be like a raging alcoholic. Has never been his style.
I think that's how I got some of my reputation, was the way I took care of other people's characters.
Yeah.
So we're now at the point where like Andy trusts me with his characters. Where, maybe a year or 2 ago, he probably wouldn't trust anyone with his characters, but he knows, me well enough that he'll trust me 100% with, the Great David or Koenig or, any of his characters to the point where I can do anything I want with them because he knows I'm going to treat them with respect.
Right. And that thing, too, that comes along after playing for a while. Like in the Lone Wolf League, I have the Arabian Dream Aliatari. I've kind of done everything I can with him in that league in a certain aspect. And we had some guys come up with these ideas for like this heel stable, and we collaborated, which is also very fun. So they wrote like part of it, I wrote part of it, and we kind of went back and forth on how it was going to play out, and then we submitted it, so the audience, if you will, which is other players. Because that's the thing to keep in mind. There was a great not all the time, but sometimes when people win the world championship, the IWA world title, if you will, not the IWAR, but the IWA's top championship. When they win that, they will submit some trash talk with it, and it's always kind of nice because it kind of makes the title feel more important than just, oh, I won another one, you know. So there was one I did one with Senya Lucha where he kind of like just talked about the fans, and it took so long to win the title because it took me 27 years to do it, if you will, give or take a few months. Then a few cycles later, I think it was Jake Duvall that did the was it Jake? I'm I'm thinking maybe it wasn't Jake, but it was a world championship where he came out and talked about, we are the fans, being the players. That, when you talk about the fans, they're the ones that know your characters. They're the ones that like what you do or not, and it's a matter of how you want to play. And the way the IWAR set up is it's built to be predicated on players who want to trash talk, who want to be in feuds, who want to have characters develop, and want to take part in events. And some of the events are free, some cost money, but it's all a part of the game, and we just essentially take what's out there and work off it. And that's what really you have to realize too is that if you want to go to some leagues, like you were saying earlier about scoring a regional, you can go to some of those slow leagues and rack up some easy championships. If you just want to rack some championships, okay, but it's what you do with those championships. And that's why I say the difference is if I win a regional in the PKL, the Psychotic Killer League, there's no one to really trash talk with. So even though I like won the 6-man titles and retained them, there's not really much to trash talk because no one really trash talks back, even though I've submitted trash talk. Whereas in the CWL, if the Von Schnapps come out and beat Black Wrestlers Matter and retain the belts, that's a huge thing to talk about. And that's where it comes to play. Like, what you put into the game is what you get out.
All right, so we're going to end it right there. Thanks, Matt, once again for joining us and dropping some wisdom on us.
Yeah, I try.
And guys, I'll see you next time on the IWAR Network.